let's start with our first era, the leather jacket Stewart. So we're not going to talk too much about the Craig Kilborn era of the show, but that's the guy who hosted it for the first 2 seasons. And they needed to get a new host, and they find this kind of 90s alt comic named Jon Stewart. And if you have ever seen the Simpsons episode where Krusty tries to be political and he puts on a leather jacket, that was apparently every white comedian in the 90s. Because if you look up Jon Stewart, I watched a clip from him performing at Boston University, and the first minute and a half is just about smoking and the rules around smoking. It could be a fucking Dennis Leary bit. He makes a big show of pulling out a cigarette, says, oh, I'm not allowed to smoke here, lights it anyways, like a fucking badass. He doesn't care, dude. He doesn't care about fucking anything. In this era, some of his stand-up punchlines are, it's very George Carlin-esque. It's like, we got really smart bombs, we got really stupid children, about how we fund the military but not education. Or, we bombed Somalia, but we made sure to feed them first. You enjoy your sandwich? Now run. This is leather jacket Krusty or what have you. And I watched a couple clips of the actual Daily Show in this era. And Craig Kilborn had this very Gen X-y, almost bordering on shock jock style of humor, and is way less political than what Jon Stewart would eventually do. Way less, I guess you could say, ideological. Like, he has an entire story, a segment, a 4-minute segment about Popeye's marriage. The fictional character Popeye was getting married, and it builds up to a punchline about how Olive Oyl just doesn't want any fisting at her marriage, and it cuts to a shot of Popeye's giant forearms.
That's a pretty good joke. I like. That's a good one. What's the problem? Oh, okay.
The truth tellers of society.
Yeah, speaking truth to power. But you can see Jon Stewart just seems uncomfortable delivering this hack joke. There's this growing period where Jon Stewart's not comfortable in a suit, and he wanted to keep wearing his leather jacket, but they said, no, this is a parody of 24-hour news. If you want to talk about right place, right time, even before the Bush era and the war on terror and the war in Iraq and the bailouts and all that shit, he starts this show, or Comedy Central hires him for the show, at a time where, for the first time, they are producing 120 hours of cable news a day. The politics of the show aren't just the war was bad and the bailouts were bad and, you know, some like good lib positions. It's also like, what the fuck, our media is dog shit. There's so much of it, but it is so bad.
I also just think Craig Kilborn was too tall. He was an asshole. Like, he had this kind of aura. He was imposing in a smarmy way. Whereas I think Jon Stewart, and I think this is part of his success, he's the first like parasocial celebrity in my life. I really felt like the warmth of him. But Craig Kilborn would never have had that kind of intimacy with the audience because he was too tall. He was frat handsome, I guess. He just didn't have the proper look that I think Jon Stewart provided.
Yes, Jon Stewart, one of his greatest strengths, I think, is his self-effacing nature. He's very good at it. He uses it often.
And he can be sincere. Could you imagine Craig Kilborn delivering the post 9/11 speech that Jon Stewart did?
No.
I wish there was enough footage of him to do a proper impression, but I can't even imagine what it would be like.
I have no idea what Craig Kilborn talks like. I have no idea if he's alive or dead.
Yeah, poor guy.
So yeah, just to get back to what Ben was saying about this being a parody news show, sometimes the initial ideology of this show gets lost because it was on for so long. But the idea is that it has all the trappings of a news show, the news alerts and the graphics, and it's presented the way that CNN is or Fox News is, but it's reporting on the dumbest shit ever. And so it has all of the formality of CNN, but they're reporting on like the guy with the world's longest fingernails. And I think that a lot of this comes from Ben Carlin, who's one of the showrunners of The Daily Show until 2006. This is a guy from The Onion. He actually coined the term area man that The Onion uses all the time. And you can see the DNA of The Onion in this Daily Show premise, which is let's present the most asinine topics with the formality of real news. And so I think that the show is extremely good in this era, mostly because of the cast that it had. So, you know, people, I think, assume that Steve Carell was on the show for like a season or two, but Steve Carell's around for 6 seasons and nearly 300 episodes. And between Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, and Jon Stewart, those are generational talents, I believe. Ben disagrees with me on this, but Steve Carell, Steve Colbert, Jon Stewart, when you have that cast where Jon Stewart might be the third most talented person on the show. It's going to result in a very, very good show. And a lot of the bits that they were doing in this era, like pre 9/11, pre George Bush administration, were doing the news, but taking like a tangential or absurdist position with relation to the news, right? Sort of a postmodern joke take on the news. And so they would have Steve Carell do a bit where he needs to report on Harry Potter, how all the kids are reading Harry Potter. But Steve Carell just fundamentally doesn't understand how a news show is supposed to work. Or the bit is he's reporting on reading the way they normally talk about video games, where it's like, oh, the kids, their eyes are glazed over. They're not playing outside. They're not going to Chuck E. Cheese. And he's interviewing a guy who runs the Chuck E. Cheese. And he's like, there are no kids here. They're all at home reading Harry Potter. And he's like, yeah, well, also it's closed. It's 9 o'clock at night. And you asked me to do this interview when it's closed. And they do a really good job of the joke being on the correspondent. Steve Carell is the butt of the joke because he's playing Brick Tamlin in a lot of these interview segments. And it's a big change from what we'll see later on, where Jordan Klepper or someone is trying to make the joke on the person they're interviewing and being like, look how stupid this idiot is.
Yeah, the joke is meant to be on the news and newsmen, which is why Steve Colbert and Steve Carell are so perfect, because they are plain Catholic, straight-laced looking white guys. They look like the types of guys that would be on Fox News. Forget Fox News. They look like a good night and good luck ass motherfucker. Like,
yes,
that's the news. Watch out for communists. What have you.
I think it's also important to point out that they came from an improv background, whereas Stewart was of the stand-up world. And I think that combination is really well suited for their positions. They're like the perfect basketball team where you have the right combination of people to make a good system. Because, yeah, their improv worked perfectly for the street stuff.
Definitely. And they're able to go dead in the eyes where you really believe they're just like stupid enough to take this position on sincerely. And I think that's something that gets lost in a lot of the recent correspondents is the recent correspondents know what position they're actually on. Whereas with Steve Carell, you really do believe he's this stupid. There's a great segment, by the way, called Produce Pete, where they're making fun of the fact that they have to fill time on a 24-hour news network by just doing stories on garlic or like what's in season. And so if you want to check out any Steve Carell's bits from that early Daily Show, I would recommend the Produce Pete series.
And the Steven versus Steven, too.
Yes, Even Stevens, their Crossfire parody. Very good.
Now, one of the most exotic ways to prepare cabbage is the Korean dish called kimchi. Chop up some cabbage, cucumbers, and some other veggies of your choice in a large mason jar. Add a mixture of 2 parts water, 1 part vinegar, some pepper, a couple cloves of garlic. Now, traditionally, you are to bury the concoction for up to 2 weeks underground. There it is. It's been there for about a month. Let's, shall we? Let's try it. Okay, let's shall. Here we go, and... God! Son of a bitch! Oh, God! Oh, Jesus!
And the thing about this era is that this is, and I mean this as a compliment, as a genuine good faith compliment, this is the show kind of at its most stupid in terms of just like a dumb bit, but because of its meta frame, I think it's elevated. So a couple examples that I have, there's one where the Steve Carell character learns that Crisco, the vegetarian lard substitute, is made from vegetables, and he just eats straight vegetable lard on camera as if it's like getting his 5 to 7 servings of vegetable a day. Incredibly fucking stupid. But yeah, within the context of a fake news program with this guy doing it, it's kind of funny. It's good for a laugh. Or there's another one I saw after the show had been on for only 4 years. Stephen Colbert records a 4-year anniversary video that's just a loop. It's like, let's look back to the time I wished you a good 4th year anniversary. And they run the same clip in a loop 3 times. And then once the clip breaks, he just chugs a 40 of malt liquor. And that's it. That's the bit. It's like, it's most meta and absurd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has the most postmodern bent to it in this very Gen X way of the joke is your expectation for what a news program should look like, and then subverting that, having the correspondent not know what the host is talking about.